The first time I realized my own wedding could become a public execution, I was already standing under an arch of white roses, with 300 people watching me breathe. The string quartet was playing something sweet and familiar, one of those melodies you hear at church funerals and small-town weddings alike, and the late afternoon sun angled through the trees like it was blessing the whole scene. My veil fluttered against my cheek. My hands were steady on my bouquet. If you'd looked at me then, you would have thought I was the calmest bride in the county. But I knew what my father had tucked into his jacket pocket. I knew what my sister was waiting to do. And I knew exactly why my mother kept glancing at my dress like she was measuring fabric for a tear. The officiant cleared his throat. My fiancé Tom squeezed my fingers. His eyes were warm and certain, the kind of eyes you could rest your whole life in. I wanted to stay there with him. I wanted to hear only the vows, only the birds, only the soft shuffling of older relatives on folding chairs. Instead, my father stood from the front row with a smile too tight to be genuine, and I felt the old familiar chill move down my spine, the one I'd felt as a girl when he said, "We need to talk," and it never ended well for me. He held up a hand, as if he'd been invited to speak. Before we go any further, he called out loud enough to carry across the lawn, "I think everyone would appreciate hearing a few words from the bride's family." The officiant hesitated. Tom's thumb brushed my knuckles, a silent question. I gave the smallest nod, not because I agreed, but because I was ready. My father stepped toward the microphone. My mother rose with him, smoothing her skirt, eyes bright as if this were her moment. And my sister Lila sat back with a little smirk, her gaze fixed on my bodice like she'd already imagined ripping it open. 300 faces turned toward them, expectant, curious, smiling. I lifted my chin and smiled right back, because 1 week earlier I'd overheard the whole plan, and the people who were about to become a laughingstock weren't going to be me. A week before the wedding, I'd gone to my parents' house for the last of the family details. That's what my mother called them, as if a wedding were a military operation, and she was the commanding officer. I'd brought over place cards and a seating chart, trying to keep the peace the way I always had, quiet, agreeable, careful. Their house smelled like lemon polish and old carpet, the same way it had smelled when I was 10. The curtains were drawn even on sunny days. Everything was tidy, but nothing was warm. My mother's decorative plates lined the kitchen wall like trophies. My father's recliner faced the television like a throne. Lila was there, of course. She always was. 32 years old and still perched like royalty at my mother's table, scrolling her phone with her nails tapping the screen. She looked up long enough to give me a once-over, the same look she used when we were teenagers, and I tried on my first prom dress. So she said, voice sweet with poison, "You're really doing this?" "I am," I told her. "I'm marrying Tom." "Tom the plumber," she corrected, as if it were a criminal title. "He owns his business," I said, keeping my tone even. "He works hard." My mother set down her coffee cup a little too firmly. "We just don't understand why you insist on embarrassing yourself," she said. "After everything we gave you, everything they gave me, like love was a loan." I focused on the seating chart. "We need to finalize the table placements. Aunt June can't sit too close to the band." "Her hearing." My father waved a hand. "Put her wherever. This whole thing is a circus anyway." I swallowed. "It's my wedding." My mother leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "It's our family's reputation," she said, "and you're dragging it through the mud." I could have argued. I could have reminded her that Tom and I paid for most of it ourselves, that I was 48 years old and didn't need permission to love a good man. But arguing with my mother was like arguing with weather. She would be what she was and you'd still get soaked. So I took a breath and said, "I'm going to use the bathroom." I walked down the hallway with the same old family photos watching me, Lila in dance costumes, Lila holding trophies, Lila smiling beside my parents like she was the only child they'd ever wanted. There were a few pictures of me too, but even then I looked like a guest in my own life. The bathroom door was closed, and I heard voices from the den, low, intent. I turned to go back, but something in my father's tone made me pause. Not anger, not his usual sharpness. Excitement. 300 guests, he was saying. Can you imagine all those people? They'll finally see what kind of stunt she's pulling. My mother gave a little laugh. It has to be during the speeches, she said. That's when everyone's paying attention. That's when it'll stick. Lila snorted. Make sure you've got the right photos, Dad. I want them to see her not looking so high and mighty. My heart thumped. I moved closer, staying in the hallway shadows like I was 16 again, eavesdropping on the way they talked about me when they thought I couldn't hear. My father said I've got the folder. The one from college. The one with her little phase. My mother made a sound of satisfaction. She was always so dramatic, always trying to be different. Well, she wants attention. She'll get it. A coldness spread across my ribs. What are you talking about? I wanted to shout. But my voice stayed trapped in my throat. Lila's chair scraped. And I'll handle the dress, she said, sharp and eager. I swear if she tries to act like some princess walking down that aisle, I'll tear her dress apart, right there, let her cry in front of everyone. My stomach rolled. I put a hand on the hallway wall to steady myself. My mother said, not too early, let her have her moment first, let her think she's won. Then we pull the rug out. My father chuckled, and after that he said we'll see how long Tom sticks around once he realizes what he married into. Lila laughed loud and mean. He'll probably run back to his toolbox. For a second, the hallway blurred. It felt like I was watching my life from somewhere far away, like a television turned too loud. These weren't strangers plotting gossip. These were my parents' people who'd held my hand when I crossed streets, who'd signed my report cards, who'd sat in pews pretending to pray while judging everyone around them. And my sister who'd learned cruelty the way some kids learn piano. I stepped back silent as breath and went into the bathroom anyway. I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked pale, older than it had that morning. My eyes looked like someone else's. I let the faucet run so no one would hear me inhale too hard. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped trying to earn their love. I turned off the water, dried my hands slowly, and looked at my reflection as if I were making a promise to her. Not this time, I whispered. I walked back into the kitchen with my shoulders squared and my smile practiced. My mother asked if I wanted more coffee. My father joked about the weather. Lila sighed dramatically like she was bored with my existence, and I nodded along gathering my papers, pretending I was still their obedient daughter. All the while my mind was already making a list. Who could I trust? Who could I call? What proof I could collect? How to protect Tom from being blindsided? How to make sure that if they wanted a spectacle, the truth, not me, would be on display? When I left their house that day, the sun was bright enough to sting my eyes. I sat in my car for a long moment with my hands on the steering wheel and my chest tight with grief. Not because I was scared of what they planned, because I realized I'd never had the family I thought I did. But grief can do something strange when you finally name it. It can turn into clarity, and by the time I started the engine, I already knew the first step. There was one person in this town my parents still feared more than gossip, and I was about to make a call. I used to think silence was a kind of virtue, that if I stayed quiet long enough, agreeable enough, useful enough, my parents would eventually look at me the way they looked at Lila, with pride instead of disappointment, with warmth instead of calculation. Growing up in our little Midwestern town, that belief settled into me as naturally as Sunday church and meatloaf on Mondays. My parents liked to tell people they raised us right. What they meant was obedient, presentable, and convenient. Lila learned early that being loud got attention. I learned that being easy caused less trouble. When I was 8, I won a spelling bee at school. I came home with a ribbon clutched in my hand, heart pounding, hoping just once that my father would smile and say he was proud. He glanced at it and said, "That's nice," before turning back to the evening news. An hour later, Lila announced she'd been picked for a solo in dance class, and my mother baked a cake. That was the pattern. Always had been. By high school, I understood my role clearly. I was the responsible one. The one who didn't make waves. The one who helped my mother with errands, who watched the house while everyone else was out. Who didn't embarrass the family by wanting too much. Lila, meanwhile, could do no wrong. When she skipped class, the teachers were out to get her. When she broke curfew, it was because she was spirited. When she snapped at me, my mother would say, "You know how sensitive your sister is. Don't provoke her." I learned not to cry where anyone could see. I married young the first time, too young. A man my parents approved of because he looked good on paper. He wore pressed shirts and said the right things in public. He also drank too much and hit walls when he was angry. When I finally left him after 10 years, my mother shook her head and said, "Well, you chose him." Lila, on the other hand, moved back home twice after failed relationships and was welcomed with open arms and fresh linens. By my 40s, I told myself I didn't need their approval anymore. I had a steady job at the county records office. I paid my bills. I volunteered at church. I lived quietly in a rented duplex with a small garden out back and a porch swing that creaked in the evenings. That's where I met Tom. He was fixing Mrs. Daly's sink next door, sleeves rolled up, hair going silver at the temples even then. He smiled at me like he meant it. He asked questions and waited for the answers. When I mentioned my job, he didn't joke about paperwork, he asked what I liked about it. We were both in our mid-40s, both a little worn around the edges, both cautious. We took our time. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into shared holidays. And slowly I learned what it felt like to be chosen. When Tom proposed quietly one evening on my porch with fireflies blinking in the dark, I cried so hard I scared myself. Not because of the ring, because of the certainty in his voice when he said, "I want to build a life with you." My parents' reaction was immediate and cold. "A plumber," my father said, as if I'd told him I was moving into a tent. "After everything we invested in you, Tom owns his own business. He employs 3 people. He volunteers with the local high school shop program. He fixes things, pipes, roofs, broken steps without making a show of it." But none of that mattered to my parents. They started calling less. When they did call, it was to suggest I reconsider. My mother sent me articles about women settling. Lila laughed openly when she heard the news. "You couldn't even land someone impressive at your age," she said. Wow, the wedding planning brought everything to the surface. My parents insisted on inviting people I barely knew. Old colleagues, distant relatives, neighbors from decades ago. "Appearances matter," my mother said. "This isn't just about you." They offered to pay for part of the reception, and I accepted my mistake, thinking it might bring peace. Instead, it gave them leverage. Every decision became a battlefield. Flowers too simple, music too plain, dress too modest. The dress was mine, though, ivory, classic, sleeves that covered my arms, not to hide my age but to honor it. When I tried it on for my mother, she pursed her lips. "It's fine," she said, "I suppose." Lila circled me like a critic. "You look old," she said lightly, "but I guess there's no fixing that." Tom stood up for me every time, but I asked him not to confront them. "It'll just make it worse," I told him. That was the old reflex talking, keep the peace, absorb the blow. But something had shifted after I overheard them. Sitting in my car that afternoon, I thought back over decades of moments I'd brushed aside. The jokes at my expense, the comparisons, the way my accomplishments were minimized and my mistakes remembered in perfect detail. I realized this wasn't about Tom. It was about control. My parents needed me small so they could feel large. They needed Lila superior so they could feel successful. And my wedding? My happiness threatened the whole story they'd told themselves. I went home and pulled out old boxes from my closet. Letters, emails, text messages I'd saved without knowing why. Moments where their words crossed a line. Not dramatic on their own, but together they told a clear story. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to stand where lies had lived. And I knew there was one person in town who understood my family better than anyone, someone my parents had always treated with careful politeness, someone whose respect they had never quite earned. He'd been a friend of my late uncle, a man who believed in fairness and records and accountability. As I sat at my kitchen table that night, the house quiet around me, I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over his name. For the first time in my life, I wasn't calling to smooth things over. I was calling to protect myself, and I didn't feel guilty at all. The man I called answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Harold," he said, his voice steady and familiar. the way voices get when they've spent a lifetime being listened to. "Mr. Whitman," I said, then corrected myself. "Harold, it's me, Anna Miller." There was a pause just long enough for recognition to settle. "Your uncle's niece," he said warmly. "I haven't heard from you in years. Are you all right?" That simple question nearly undid me. I swallowed. I need advice," I said. "And discretion." "You've called the right person," he replied without hesitation. "Tell me what's going on." Harold Whitman had been a county judge before he retired. He wasn't famous and he wasn't flashy, but he was respected in the way that mattered most in a town like ours. He believed in records in fairness and in quiet authority. My parents had always been careful around him, polite, deferential, a little stiff. They knew he saw things clearly. I told him everything. Not in a rush, not in a panic. I surprised myself with how calm my voice sounded as I explained what I'd overheard, what my parents and sister planned to do, and how long this pattern had existed. When I finished, there was silence on the line. Then Harold said, "Anna, what they're planning is not only cruel, it's deliberate." "Yes," I said, "that's what scares me." "Do you want to stop it?" he asked, "or do you want to expose it?" I thought about that for a moment. About my wedding day. About Tom's face if he were blindsided. About the humiliation they wanted to serve me like a dish at my own table. "I want to protect my future," I said finally. "And I want the truth known. Calmly. Without a scene." Harold exhaled slowly. "Then we'll do this the right way." Over the next few days I gathered what I had. Old emails from my mother questioning my character. Texts from Lila mocking my relationship. Messages from my father warning me not to embarrass the family. None of it was criminal. But together it painted a clear picture of intent. Harold helped me organize it, labeling dates and contexts, explaining what mattered and what didn't. "We're not trying to destroy them," he reminded me gently. "We're simply letting the facts speak." Meanwhile, I acted as if nothing had changed. I went to dress fittings. I smiled through tense dinners. I listened as my mother made passive-aggressive comments about seating arrangements and menu choices. Lila grew bolder as the day approached, little digs about my age, my dress, Tom's job. I let them slide, my calm, unnerving her. One afternoon she cornered me in the hallway of my parents' house. "You're awfully quiet lately," she said, eyes narrowing. "You're not getting cold feet, are you?" I smiled. "Not at all." She studied me like she was searching for cracks. "Good," she said. "I'd hate for all this effort to go to waste." I drove home shaking but resolved. Tom noticed, of course. He always did. One evening as we sat at our kitchen table sorting thank you cards, he reached for my hand. "You've been carrying something," he said. "I can tell." I took a breath and told him everything. The plan, the threats, the call I'd made. His jaw tightened, not with anger but with protectiveness. "I won't let them hurt you," he said firmly. "I know," I said. "That's why I needed you to know. But I don't want you confronting them. Not yet." He studied my face. Then he nodded. "I trust you," he said. "And whatever you're planning, I'm with you." Those words settled something deep in me. As the wedding day drew closer, Harold and I finalized our approach. He would attend as a guest, invited by me, unnoticed by my parents, until it was too late. If my father attempted his speech as planned, Harold would step forward at the right moment. Not to accuse, not to shout, to clarify. "I'll simply remind everyone," he said, "that a wedding is a public event, and public statements carry responsibility." I practiced my part too. Saying nothing, holding my composure, letting my silence speak louder than any accusation. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to change. I understood that after tomorrow my relationship with my parents might never be the same. Strangely, I felt at peace with that. On the morning of the wedding, my mother hugged me stiffly. "Try not to be nervous," she said. "Just smile." I did smile. Because I knew something she didn't. Lila brushed past me, whispering "big day" like it was a threat. Harold arrived early, nodding to me from across the lawn, his presence steadying as a lighthouse. Tom squeezed my hand. The guests settled into their seats. The music began, and as I stepped forward, veil lifting in the breeze, I realized something unexpected. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing myself for impact. I was ready. The morning of my wedding arrived soft and clear, the kind of Midwestern morning that feels borrowed from a better memory. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of the small bridal suite at the community garden where the ceremony was being held. Someone had opened a window, and I could hear birds arguing in the hedges, as if nothing important were about to happen at all. My dress hung on the back of the door, pressed and perfect. I stood in my slip hands resting on the edge of the sink and studied my reflection. There were faint lines around my eyes now earned honestly. My hair had been set simply pinned back from my face. I looked like a woman who knew who she was. That alone felt like a victory. The room filled slowly. My friend Carol from church arrived first, carrying a tray of pastries, and fussing over me the way women do when they're trying to distract themselves from bigger things. Then came my cousin Ruth, then the photographer, then my mother, late as usual. She took in the room with a critical glance. "You didn't iron the sash," she said. "It's fine," I replied gently. She sniffed. "Well, it's your day." That sentence had always sounded like a gift. Now it sounded like a warning. Lila swept in behind her, already dressed, already dramatic. Her eyes went straight to my gown. I watched her jaw tighten for just a second, an involuntary reaction she couldn't hide. "You're really wearing that?" she said. "Yes." She tilted her head. "Bold choice." I smiled. I thought so too. She looked unsettled by my calm. Good. As they left to take their seats, I closed the door and exhaled slowly. I whispered a quiet prayer, not for protection, but for steadiness. Then I stepped into my dress. Outside, the venue had come alive. White folding chairs lined the aisle, set beneath tall trees, whose leaves cast gentle shadows across the lawn. People greeted one another with hugs and handshakes. Older couples leaned close, whispering memories of their own weddings. I recognized neighbors, former coworkers, church friends. Faces from different chapters of my life gathered in one place. 300 of them. I spotted my parents in the front row. My father sat stiffly, jacket buttoned, his expression proud in the way that always made my stomach tighten. My mother leaned toward him, whispering something, her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lila sat just behind them, one leg crossed over the other, her foot bouncing with barely contained energy. And then I saw Harold. He stood off to the side, speaking quietly with the officiant. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. No drama, no flourish, just reassurance. Tom appeared at the end of the aisle, looking handsome and nervous in his suit. When he saw me, his whole face softened. That look, steady, open, sincere, was the reason I'd found the courage to change my life. Everything else was noise. The music began. As I walked down the aisle, I felt something unexpected lightness. Not because I'd forgotten what was coming, but because I had accepted it. Whatever happened next, I would not be alone in it. I reached Tom's side, and the ceremony unfolded like a familiar ritual. Words about commitment, about partnership, about love that endures. I listened closely, grounding myself in each sentence. Then came the moment I'd been bracing for. The officiant smiled and said, "Before we continue, would anyone like to say a few words?" My father stood immediately. He moved with purpose, like a man who had rehearsed. My mother rose beside him. Lila leaned forward, eyes gleaming. My heart didn't race. It settled. My father took the microphone. "Thank you," he said, clearing his throat. "As the bride's father, I just want to share a few thoughts." He paused, scanning the crowd. "We've always wanted the best for our daughter," he continued. "We raised her with strong values, responsibility, respectability." I saw Harold shift his weight, slightly attentive but patient. My father went on, his tone sharpening. "So when she told us her plans, we were surprised, concerned." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tom's hand tightened around mine. I squeezed back. And as parents, my father said we feel it's our duty to speak honestly, even if it's uncomfortable. That's when Harold stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said calmly, his voice carrying without strain. "Before this continues, I believe it's important to clarify the purpose of this moment." My father turned, startled. "Who are you?" Harold smiled politely. "Harold Whitman, retired county judge, a friend of the bride." A few heads turned. Recognition flickered across faces. Respect followed. "This is a wedding," Harold said evenly. "A public celebration. Not a forum for personal grievances." My mother's smile faltered. Harold continued, "I've been asked to ensure that any statements made here are appropriate and truthful." My father opened his mouth, then closed it. Lila stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You don't know what she's—" Harold raised a hand. "Sit down," he said gently. "You'll have your chance to speak if it's relevant." The silence was profound. My father's shoulders sagged. He handed the microphone back to the officiant without another word. The officiant cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said. "Let's continue." The ceremony resumed. And something remarkable happened. People stopped watching my parents. They watched us. When Tom and I exchanged vows, there were tears. When we kissed, there was applause, real, warm, unforced. Lila stared at the ground. My mother dabbed at her eyes, but I couldn't tell if it was regret or embarrassment. As the recessional began, I felt a wave of relief wash through me, not because I'd won, but because the truth had stood quietly and firmly, exactly where it belonged. The reception would come next. And with it, the final turning of the tide. The reception was held under a long white tent at the edge of the garden, strung with warm lights that glowed softly as evening settled in. Tables were dressed in simple linens, mason jars filled with wildflowers, the kind of setting older folks always say feels like home. The smell of roast chicken and fresh bread drifted through the air. People laughed, glasses clinked. For a moment, it almost felt like any other happy gathering. Almost. I could feel it, though, the tension humming just beneath the surface. My parents sat stiffly at their table, smiling too much, talking too little. Lila picked at her food, her knee bouncing under the table like she was waiting for a signal that never came. Harold sat near the back with his wife quiet and observant. Tom's co-workers laughed loudly at a joke near the bar. My church friends hugged me and told me how beautiful everything was. More than one older woman squeezed my hands and said, "You did good, honey." I believed them. After dinner, the band quieted, and the MC tapped the microphone. "All right, folks," he said cheerfully. "It's time for a few speeches." My heart gave a small, steady thump. This was it. The maid of honor spoke first, my friend Carol. She told a gentle story about meeting Tom and me at the farmer's market, about how we both argued over the last basket of peaches, and somehow decided to share. People laughed. It was warm, human. Then the best man spoke, short, sincere. He toasted to hard work and loyalty and second chances. Tom's eyes shone, and then the MC said, "And now a few words from the bride's parents." A hush fell, not dramatic, but noticeable. My father stood again. This time his movements lacked confidence. He glanced toward Harold, then back to the crowd. My mother rose beside him, lips pressed, thin hands clasped as if in prayer. My sister stayed seated. Her eyes locked on me, sharp and resentful. My father took the microphone. "Thank you," he said. His voice wasn't as strong now. We want to congratulate Anna and Tom." He paused. The pause stretched. "We raised Anna to be responsible," he continued, but the old edge crept back in. "And sometimes responsibility means acknowledging past mistakes." There it was. The familiar turn. I felt Tom's hand tighten. I placed my other hand over his, grounding us both. My father cleared his throat. "Before this evening goes any further, I think people deserve to know." "That's enough." Harold stood. Not abruptly, not angrily, just decisively. He walked to the front, every step measured the way men who have spent a lifetime in courtrooms know how to command space without raising their voice. My father froze. "You again," Harold nodded politely. "Again," he said, "because this appears to be a continuation of an attempt to publicly shame your daughter." Murmurs rippled through the tent. My mother spoke sharply. "How dare you accuse us?" Harold raised a hand. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I'm not accusing. I'm clarifying." He turned to the guests. "Many of you know me," he said. "I've lived in this county for over 40 years. I'm here because Anna asked me to be." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. The sight of it made my father's face drain of color. This folder contains messages and statements sent by members of the bride's immediate family over the past year, Harold continued. Messages that express intent to embarrass, undermine, and humiliate her during this event. A collective intake of breath moved through the crowd. Lila shot to her feet. "That's a lie," Harold turned to her. "Miss," he said evenly, "please sit down. Your messages are included." Her mouth opened, then closed. She sank back into her chair, eyes darting around as people began to look at her, not with curiosity, but with something closer to disappointment. Harold did not read the messages aloud. He didn't need to. Out of respect for this couple, he said, "I won't share the contents here. But I want it understood that this wedding was nearly turned into a spectacle against the bride's will." My father stammered, "We were just trying to help her." "By tearing her down?" Harold asked quietly. Silence. My mother's face flushed crimson. She looked around, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. These were the same people she'd wanted to impress, the same ones she'd counted on to laugh along. No one laughed. Harold closed the folder. "This couple deserves dignity," he said, "and so do all of you who came here to celebrate them." He turned to me then. "Anna," he said gently, "would you like to say anything?" I stood. My legs felt steady. My voice did too. "I don't," I said simply. "Tonight is about love, not explanations." A murmur of approval moved through the tent. Someone clapped, then someone else. My father looked at me, then not angry, not smug, but small. For the first time in my life, he looked unsure of his footing. Lila stared at the tablecloth, her shoulders hunched. The fire had gone out of her. The MC cleared his throat, visibly relieved. "Well," he said, forcing a smile, "how about we get back to celebrating?" The band struck up a song. The tension eased like a knot finally loosened. As Tom and I took the dance floor, I felt something lift inside me, not triumph, but release. The weight I'd carried for decades loosened its grip. Around us, people smiled again. Not at my parents. Not at my sister. At us. And in that moment, I understood something I'd never fully grasped before. Karma doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives quietly when the truth stands still and lets everyone see it. The music carried us through the rest of the evening like a gentle tide, washing away what little bitterness remained. People returned to their conversations, though the tone had shifted. There was a softness now, an unspoken understanding that something important had happened, something that didn't need to be dissected aloud. My parents stayed seated for a long time. My mother rearranged the silverware on her plate again and again, as if order might return if she just tried hard enough. My father stared into his drink without touching it. The confidence he'd worn so comfortably for years had slipped, and without it, he looked like an aging man unsure of where he stood. Lila excused herself and disappeared toward the restrooms. She didn't come back for a while. Tom and I danced. Slowly at first, then with more ease. His hand rested warm and steady at my back, grounding me in the present. I leaned my head against his shoulder and let myself breathe. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I am," I said, and meant it. Friends approached us between songs, offering congratulations that felt deeper than polite ritual. An older couple from church took my hands and told me how proud they were of the way I'd handled myself. "That took strength," the woman said, her eyes kind. "Not everyone learns that." Harold came by later. giving me a small nod. "You did well," he said. "You chose dignity." "Thank you," I replied. "For everything." He smiled. "Truth has a way of doing most of the work on its own." As dusk settled, the lights under the tent glowed brighter. Laughter returned, not forced, not brittle, but real. Tom's co-workers toasted him. My friends teased me about my dancing. For the first time that day, I felt entirely present in my own celebration. Eventually, my mother approached. She stood a few feet away at first, hands, clasped eyes flicking between me and Tom. "May I speak with you?" she asked quietly. I looked at Tom. He nodded once and stepped aside, though he stayed close enough that I could feel him there. My mother swallowed. "I didn't expect this," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the tent, the guests, the easy warmth that had reclaimed the space. You thought you could control how this went," I said gently. Her lips pressed together. For a moment she looked as though she might argue. Then her shoulders sagged. "We wanted what we thought was best," she said weakly. "You wanted what made you comfortable," I replied. My voice didn't shake. "There's a difference." She nodded, tears pooling but not yet falling. "People were looking at us," she whispered. "They were judging." I held her gaze. "That's how I've felt my whole life." That was when she cried, quietly, no dramatics. Just tears slipping down her cheeks as the truth settled in. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "I'm not asking you to fix it tonight," I said. "I'm asking you to respect me." She nodded again, slower this time. "I can try." It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. My father didn't approach me that evening. He left early, slipping out while most people were distracted by cake and conversation. For once, he didn't command attention by leaving. Few even noticed. Lila never said a word. When she finally returned from wherever she'd gone, she avoided my eyes entirely. I saw her whispering to someone near the bar, her face tight with frustration. Whatever she said, it didn't land the way she wanted. People nodded politely and turned away. That more than anything told me the story had changed. The rest of the night unfolded the way weddings are meant to, small moments stitched together by joy. Tom and I cut the cake. We laughed when someone knocked over a glass of punch. We hugged friends and promised to keep in touch. As the crowd thinned and the band packed up, I stood near the edge of the tent watching the last of the guests drift away. The air was cool now. Crickets had taken over from the music. I thought I might feel victorious. Instead, I felt free. Free from the old fear of disappointing people who had never truly seen me. Free from the belief that family meant enduring whatever was handed to you. Free from the silence I'd mistaken for grace. Tom joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said, smiling as we looked out over the emptying garden. "More than ready." I knew there would be conversations later. Awkward ones, painful ones, boundaries to set and enforce. Reconciliation wouldn't be quick or easy, and it wouldn't be guaranteed. But that was all right. Because the laughing had stopped, not with cruelty, not with revenge, but with clarity. And clarity, I was learning, is a powerful thing. The weeks after the wedding were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful exactly, but honest. Tom and I settled into married life the way two people our age do, gently, deliberately, without pretending everything was suddenly perfect. Mornings meant coffee on the porch. Evenings meant shared dinners and conversations about ordinary things, leaky faucets, grocery lists, the neighbor's dog that barked too much. Normal life. The kind I'd always wanted. My parents didn't call right away. When they finally did, it was my mother. Her voice sounded smaller, stripped of its usual sharpness. "Can we talk?" she asked. About what, I replied, not unkindly but clearly. There was a pause. About everything. We met at a diner halfway between our houses, a place with vinyl booths, laminated menus, and waitresses who'd worked there longer than I'd been alive. Neutral ground, American ground, no home field advantage for anyone. My mother arrived early. My father came 10 minutes late. They looked older than they had at the wedding, not physically, something deeper, as if the version of themselves they'd carefully maintained for years had finally cracked. We ordered coffee. It sat untouched for a while. My father spoke first. That night he said stiffly was embarrassing. I nodded. It was meant to be humiliating, I replied. For me. He frowned. We didn't think. That's the problem, I said calmly. You never did. My mother wiped her eyes. We were afraid, she said. Afraid you were making a mistake. Afraid of what people would say. And you chose to protect yourselves, I said, instead of protecting me. Silence followed. Not the old, heavy silence of denial, but something more fragile. I don't know how we became those people, my mother whispered. I did. But I didn't say it. This wasn't about blame anymore. It was about boundaries. I'm willing to have a relationship, I said slowly. But it won't look like the old one. My father bristled. Meaning no insults disguised as concern. No comparisons, no control, I said. And if it happens again, I will leave, without drama, without explanation. They exchanged a glance. You'd really do that, my father asked. Yes, I said. Because I finally learned that love doesn't require self-erasure. That was the moment something shifted. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was reality. Lila didn't reach out at all. I heard about her through others' complaints, bitterness stories that always ended with her as the misunderstood victim. The difference was this people no longer leaned in. They no longer laughed along. The charm had worn thin. One afternoon months later, she showed up at my door unannounced. She stood there awkwardly, arms crossed, eyes darting behind me as if expecting an audience. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she said. I waited. She sighed. I just didn't think you'd stand up. There it was. Not remorse, recognition. I did, I said. And I will again. She studied my face, then scoffed lightly. You think you're better now? No, I replied. I think I'm done competing. She left shortly after. We haven't spoken much since. That may change one day, or it may not. And that's okay. Because reconciliation doesn't mean returning to harm. It means choosing what is healthy and letting the rest fall away. What surprised me most was how many people reached out after the wedding quietly, privately. Older women. Men who'd lived long enough to recognize familiar patterns. They told me their own stories. About siblings who were favored. Parents who confused control with love. Lifetimes spent shrinking to keep the peace. One woman took my hands and said, I wish I'd done what you did before I got tired. That stayed with me. I didn't win by humiliating anyone. I didn't win because my parents were exposed. I won because I stopped participating in a story that required me to suffer. That's the part people miss about karma. It isn't punishment, it's consequence. It's what happens when the truth stands still long enough for everyone to see it, and no one rushes in to cover it up. Tom and I still talk about that day sometimes. Not with anger, with perspective. That smile you had, he once said. That wasn't revenge. He was right. It was relief. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life, know this. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to destroy to defend yourself. And you don't owe access to people who treat love like leverage. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do, especially later in life, is to stop explaining, stop shrinking, and start choosing peace. If this story moved you, if it felt uncomfortably familiar, take a moment to reflect on your own boundaries. Share this with someone who might need it. And if you'd like to hear more stories about truth, resilience, and quiet justice, consider subscribing. Some endings aren't loud, they're honest, and they last.